Welcome to Change Committee. Can't believe it's February. It seems like yesterday we had the November meeting. I have a couple of specific welcomes. We've got a couple of observers today. Lynn Gow, Project Manager of Safe and Well, welcome. And Curtis Montgomery, who's our newly appointed Manager of Change Centre of Excellence. Curtis, would you like to say just a couple of sentences to introduce yourself, please? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So, morning, everyone. I'm Curtis Montgomery. I am Change Centre of Excellence Manager, as Fiona says. I've been brought in to help support development of the capabilities around change in the organisation, focusing on benefits management, planning and capabilities around capacity and delivery, and also, and most importantly, looking at how we support people in developing and role and executing project change as well as they possibly can. I come with a good 20 years of experience in change management, from the sharp end of project management right through program and portfolio management, various heads of PMO, heads of change governance and assurance roles, and I've also been involved in strategic program management, as well as setting up and running PMO teams, business analysis and architecture teams, and various capabilities within change. So that's my potted history.
Thanks, Curtis. Impressive potted history, and I'm sure we'll make very good use of all of that in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you.
Thanks. Apologies for absence. I think we've just got the chair, Kirsty, and John Dickey. Is that correct?
That's right, Chair.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Heather. And then agenda item 3, consideration of and decision on any items to be taken in private. As you can see, Command and Control Futures is in private for the usual financial and contractual reasons. Anything else that anybody thinks should be taken in private? Nope, good, thank you. And item 4, declaration of interests. Any declaration of interests from anybody? Nope, thank you very much. That takes us on then to the minutes of the previous meeting from 4th of November. I shall do the usual and go through these page by page. So just shout out any amends or comments. So page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and finally page 8. All good. Thank you. So we will take those minutes as an accurate minute of the meeting on the 4th of November. Next up is the action log, which is rather sparse, but Heather, is there anything you want to say on this?
Thank you, Chair. Heather Craig, support team. Just to say that there's only one action on the action log. It's been marked as complete. So if the committee are content with the position statement update, can remove that action.
All happy? Thank you. Senior Management Board action log, Ross.
Thanks, Chair. Ross Haggart, Deputy Chief Officer. There's one action on this, Chair, which is in relation to a dossier that we received at the last SMB meeting on the procurement of an electrical fire appliance. We decided ordinarily when we replace appliances we wouldn't create a major project because it's business as usual for Ian Morris and the asset management team, but because this is a new and novel development, an electrical fire appliance, we're creating it as a major project. The dossier came forward to the last SMB meeting, but we felt as an SMB that the breadth of the dossier needed to be expanded a bit. it was because it come from the asset management team. It quite understandably focused on the procurement, the design, the construction of the appliance, but we recognised as an SMB there are other factors that need to be taken into account. So I've asked for that dossier to be taken off table. I've actually got a meeting tomorrow morning with Ian Morris and Stuart Stevens, Director of Service Delivery, to discuss the broadening the scope of that dossier. Once we've done that, it'll come back to SMB, and then through normal governance, we'll make its way to the change committee. I don't see any reason why that won't come back to your next meeting, which is in May. So yeah. I would expect that to come forward to change committee in May, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. No, that's very, very interesting piece of work as well. That's good to hear. Thanks. Nick.
And just so you know, Chair and other members, including the senior leadership team, obviously we got an interest in that with the Service Delivery Committee talking about cross-cutting themes, and we'll be looking at that as part of the climate change programme of papers and discussions that go on with this Service Delivery Committee.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 8, is the Change Portfolio Major Projects. The Gillian Show. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Gillian Buchanan, Portfolio Office. So you have got the cover report, which summarises the dashboard for you. So I will just highlight the areas that are highlighted. You will see that the Service Delivery Model Programme is showing red for the skills and resource, and the narrative explains why that is round about the recruitment for the key positions within that programme. The Emergency Services Network is shown amber for cost and amber for time, because some of the funding has been released from the Scottish Government, but we're not clear on what the long-term funding looks like, so that's still to be agreed. RVDS, there is 3 dossiers and a framework document as part of the pack today. David Farris is here to talk to these as well. People Training, Finance and Asset Systems. We've got 2 projects within that, which are the Rostering project and the People, Payroll and Finance project. There's a brief today for the Rostering project, which Paul McGovern will speak to, and you'll also have the People Training and Finance Systems update report that Paul does as a regular item to this committee. You'll see that Safe and Well remains green for the overall project health. However, there's some delays on some of the milestones, but assurances have been provided by the project team that that's not going to have any immediate impact on the overall delivery timeline at this stage. CCF shown amber across the board, and again we know that we're discussing that project in the private session, and Gary Mackay will be able to talk to that. And McDonald Road is shown amber for cost, quality and skills and resource. And again, Ian Morris is here should there be any particular questions round about that. And I've nothing else to add with regards to the dashboard. And we've got the rostering brief, the RVDS paperwork, and the People Training and Finance Asset Systems Programme update. But I'm happy to take any general questions round about the report or the dashboard. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gillian. Any comments or questions on the dashboard? Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio Function. It's just for committee members to note, although it was noted in the closure of the action within the action log, section 3.4 of the report has been updated with the latest position statement in terms of capacity to deliver. So just to draw committee members' attention to that.
Thanks, Andy. Stuart? Oh, sorry, I don't know who was first, Stuart or Angelina? Stuart?
Go, Stuart, go.
To my microphone. I just got a very quick question, actually. It's not really a question. It's I find the reportings, that dashboard is really very helpful, but I do find myself forgetting the scale of each of the projects, and I wondered whether the financial scale of each of the projects, and I wondered if we could even just, I don't mean as a dynamic number, but even just as a one-off for each project, as the budget is set to give us just to remind us the sense of it. Is it a couple 100,000 or 2-3 million? That would just be quite helpful. Thank you.
That's a very good point. Even a scale you know, if we're in very early days in terms of quantification, just a scale would be helpful. Andy, is it on this particular point you want to come back on? There you go.
It is, Chair, thanks. Stuart, Andy Main, Head of Portfolio, just to come back on that, Stuart, to try and give the members a bit of assurance. And there is a bit of work going on internally in terms of developing a financial reporting tool across the portfolio. We do have an outline of what that's going to look like, Stuart. I think I mentioned at the previous committee that what I would like to get in a position is a total cost picture for each project within the portfolio, and to be able to aggregate that up, of course, as well, across the portfolio. And we've done a bit of work, as I mentioned, with regards to that. That work slowed down because the finance teams are going through the annual budgeting cycle at the moment. But just to provide some assurance that it's in the pipe and it is coming. I take note about the potential scaling. So I'll go back internally and see if there's anything that we can do with regards to that. But it was just to make note that there is work underway.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Heather, can you grab that as an action, please? Angelina.
Thank you. Angelina Foster, board member and member of the Change Committee. Mine too is a quick issue. It's a question in relation to 351 in the covering paper. Julian, a point that you helpfully flagged in your introductory remarks around the red status and the skills and so forth. And although this is telling us that there's some posts on offer, so there's a sign of hope, as it were, but it also flags some posts that are not yet at that stage. So my question is, can you remind me, is this for a sort of unremarkable reason of simply the wheels turn perhaps less quickly than we would wish at times in terms of recruitment machinery, or is this a marketplace issue for this particular skill set where we are having trouble recruiting because we're competing in a place where the skills are thin on the ground? Do you see my question? So is it just a kind of administrative thing, or is there a more substantive market issue here?
Perhaps I could ask David Lockhart to come in on the call, because he'll know more about the detail round about that. He's obviously closer to the project than I am, and hopefully he'll be able to answer your questions, Angelina.
David Lockhart, Head of Service Development. Thanks very much for your question. Yes, as you note, the public involvement and engagement team has been highlighted as progressing. I can now confirm that the manager has accepted, as of yesterday, the offer of employment and will be starting with us on the 29th of March. So that's really good news in terms of creating that team. With regards to the senior GIS analyst role that's mentioned there, that has been advertised twice previously, but unfortunately failed to deliver a suitable candidate. More recently, we've redefined or revised the job description, and that post will be going out to advert next week. So we're hopeful that we can attract a suitable candidate through this third round of advertisement. We're also exploring other avenues through universities to establish whether or not there's any interest in postgraduates in joining us for a short-term period. So hopefully that provides you some context, some further context and some assurance moving forward.
Thank you, David. It does. And to be honest, it was the GIS analyst and the business impact assessment ones that had caught my eye. So that your answer is very specific on that.
Thank you. Paul, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just specific to this point, Chair, and Angelina, just to expand a little further just on the question asked around that pressure between the recruitment process or the market conditions. The true answer is a bit of both. but we are seeing, you know, quite a high number of requests into our own HR team around different posts across the organisation, and they're managing the pressures. There are some questions around the process there, but also we are seeing specific market challenges around specific posts. We are seeing the same across the ICT function in specific areas of ICT, development being one of them, but we're also seeing some of that across these more specific posts around public consultation and engagement. So it's almost a little bit of a perfect storm that's given us a bit of challenge in having to go through the process more than once, because we're having to re-advertise after being unsuccessful in getting posts the first time round is adding to that time scale. So just a little bit more context there around that for you.
Very helpful.
Thanks, Paul. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Brian Baverstock, board member. I mean, I really like the dashboard. I think it's an excellent kind of overview of projects. I think there's probably still two areas where I think it might be enhanced a little bit more. The first of these is round about the revised dates. It's not clear from the dashboard if there have been revisions to implementation dates, and it would be really, I think, helpful to understand if there is slippage, what is that slippage and what's the main cause of it. Because if I use the CRIM for an example, I mean, there is a big red roundabout resources, delays in recruitment, etc. You would have thought that that would have impacted on the timeline for the project. So, you know, but I don't know in truth. The other area where I think it could perhaps say a little bit more, and I emphasize little bit more because it is a dashboard, you know, the intention is not to provide, you know, pages of narrative here. And again, I'll use the CRIM as an example, if I may. It's around the interdependencies, because, you know, the CRIM is such a building block for so many things across the organisation, including in relation to other projects, things like the estate strategy, and also the strategic direction of the organisation. So it's a massively important piece of work, and I think I would like to understand a little bit more at a high level of just those implications. So I wonder if thought might be given to how you do that succinctly. And my final point was just really a question about how rigorous we are in the RAGS status. We're going to come on to talk about CCF in the private session, so I don't expect to go into the detail of that. But I mean, for that project, that the RAG status is amber across the piece, and the definition is slippage but within tolerance. Now, I'm not going to say any more than that, but I would question the reasonableness of that. And I just wonder whether we focus on changes and report those changes, but do we actually go back and rigorously assess the RAG status? So more observations than questions, Julian, I think.
Really good points. I think I've got a bit of echo. The point around dates and slippage, we've definitely talked about that before. So, you know, that it would be really nice to because otherwise we don't really have a grasp of the implications in terms of slippage, etc., etc. So, Andy, I'm sure you're well aware of that. The piece around interdependencies, absolutely. And actually the comment on RAG, I had scribbled something similar. I suspect there might be a bit of a timing issue there, but we will discuss that more fully. So good points, well made. Andy, then Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and Andy Main, Head of Portfolio. Just to come back, Brian, on some of those thoughts, and I absolutely thoughts for consideration as you requested. As you know, thought done nothing, but I did want to give the members some assurance that the dashboard in itself is an area that we're having a discussion as a team about around the relevancy of some of the information, or where indeed we might have some gaps with regards to that. Your first point on milestones and trying to identify whether or not we've got any slippage in past experience. What we've done there is we've had the milestone that you can see in the dashboard, and then we've had maybe a section on that addresses a latest thinking forecast. So you've got the milestone, and then you've got what you're actually forecasting or trending towards, so you can see the variation of that. So that's just one element that we're considering as a team based on the observation that you've made. On dependencies, exactly the same. Dependencies is definitely a gap, and we're actually looking to work with one or two of our current programmes on the introduction of dependency management. So we've come up with a framework. It's something that we're introducing. We're going to let that embed for a couple of months just to see how effective that is, because we need the data before we can start to look to put things onto dashboards and reports. So we want to see how effective we can capture that data and then look to integrate it into the dashboards. So same observation. And on the RAG statuses, I'll leave the CCF situation for further conversation. But standardisation around the RAG status is going to be really important for us going forward, where what do we do typically with regards to red, amber, green, but also understanding that dependent on the scale and complexity of some of our projects, we may put specific RAG guidance in place. So the observations are legitimate, Brian, and you can be assured that we are discussing that.
Thanks, Andy. Ross, just before I bring you in, see on the first point in terms of dates, the baseline word came into my head. Would you like to say a bit more, Andy, around where you are in I don't know, developing a framework culture, whatever you want to call it, where we do baseline plans? So to Brian's point, we can always look at the original baseline date in a dashboard such as this and you know, assess slippage from that. So just a few words around baselining, please.
Yeah, I think the key word that I'll draw out there, Chair, is culture. So what I think we need to do first and foremost is address the culture of change requests coming forward to take a project out of red or amber status back into green. That's not a reason for rebaselining a project. So we need to do a bit of education across the organisation on that first and foremost, before we start to get into how do we actually effectively baseline the projects and the programmes within the portfolio. So we've not done a great deal of work on baselining yet. Okay, we're doing more education around, you know, it's okay to report red. What does red actually mean? What does our red, amber, green statuses mean? And then we'll start to get into the conversation around what does change request mean and what does baselining mean. So we've not done a great deal on baselining at this moment in time, Fiona. Chair.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially the education and culture elements. Brian, did you want back in, or yeah, and then Ross? Sorry, keep making you wait, yeah. Ross.
Sorry, Ross. I'm sorry for jumping the queue. Yeah, I think, Andy, that's been really helpful, and you've addressed the points. I'm not entirely sure you've fully answered my point on slippage and dates, and the thing that I have in my mind is that the organisation has got a well tried and tested process looking at internal audit recommendations, and just bear with me because you're probably wondering how is this relevant. But there is a very clear, simple matrix that records the original date and any update to those dates, and it also shows the number of variations to those dates, so you can see very, very clearly. And I think that would be helpful in this case. Your comment about RAG, I think, is excellent. That the idea that you're attributing sort of definitions and actions and standardization to that, And I mean, the thought that kind of pops into my head is the relationship of all of that to risk, and the actions being driven by a measured assessment of risk. So that's just another observation. So thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Brian. Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and I hope people's expectation hasn't been raised by the delay in me speaking. It was just to go back to Brian's point regarding rigour round about the RAG statuses, and just to and I think you touched on it yourself, Fiona, you know, in terms of that timing, and I wouldn't like to use timing as an excuse, but there are some timing issues between programme, project, board meetings, SMB meetings and change committee meetings. Albeit we do try and give you the most up-to-date information that we can at the change committee, but there will be some factors. But I think just to provide reassurance to Brian and the rest of the committee members, at SMB we absolutely do apply rigour to the RAG statuses. So it's just really to provide that assurance that it is something that is very much at the forefront of the scrutiny that we perform as a senior management board when the dashboard comes forward, and either we are given a justification as to why the RAG is as it is, or projects will go away, consider it in the project board and amend it accordingly. So it's just really to provide that assurance that we do give it rigour at SMB, and of course we would welcome that rigour being applied by the change committee as well to any specific areas that you think maybe there's a wee bit of disconnect. So thanks for that.
No, thanks, Ross. Thanks all. A good discussion, very helpful. I'm having some technical issues with Wi-Fi, so if I disappear, Brian, you're on chair. I'll try and swap to a different network, hopefully without any disruption, but just to give you advance warning. Next up on the agenda is the People Training, Finance and Asset Systems Programme rostering brief. Who's talking to this one?
I think that's myself, Chair, Paul McGovern.
Paul, hi. Yes, of
Hi.
course. On you go.
Thanks very much. I won't go into I won't kind of read out loud what's in the brief, but there was a couple of things I maybe just wanted to highlight before kind of hand over to yourselves for any questions. It's the second project within the P2VS programme that's underway, and there's a lot of similar themes with the first project, People, Payroll, Finance, and that we're looking at new ways of working, which incidentally will be supported by new systems, not the other way around. We're dealing with legacy systems that have been in place for more than a decade, and that lots of people are working really hard to keep the lights on, but we're really delivering a service that's fit for quality for 2022. But there are some differences. So unlike the People Payroll Finance, where we have single systems, on the retained rostering, we are still dealing with 8 legacy systems. So it's a bit back like it was in 2012. And the rostering project will much more directly impact on mobilisation. There's a direct and immediate impact if we have any problems or mistakes or delays with the rostering side. It'll directly impact on mobilisation. So the criticality is certainly high. I also wanted, if it's okay, just to take a moment just to give some examples and of what we've been finding in the rostering, just to try and kind of bring that project brief to life a little bit.
That would be really helpful. I think these examples are really valuable. So yes, please. Perfect.
So there was 3 examples I wanted to cover. The first example is around managing Toil. So we have a system for whole-time rostering called Kronos, and there's functionality in there to allow us to manage Toil, but we're not really using it. And managing Toil has been left to stations to implement their own procedures. So some stations are using Excel documents stored in SharePoint, and some stations are using physical books. Where it's a physical books, some stations are keeping them locked in cupboards. Creating a situation whereby people need to go and find the key to update the Toil in a physical book. So there's no visibility across the service of how much we owe in Toil. Finance have got no visibility of what that Toil is at any particular point. So that's an example. We have functionality in system, but we're not necessarily making the best use of it. The second example concerns the volume of calls that come into our central staffing team. So a firefighter has got limited access to, well, no access to any self-service tools and limited access, remote access to Kronos to look at their own rota pattern. So the central staffing team, as a consequence, get a lot of calls phoning up to find out what is their leave and what's their roster reserve days. We've asked for the kind of a breakdown of the volumes of those calls. We haven't got that yet, but the anecdotal evidence is that there's lots of those types of calls coming into central staffing. So that's an example where we don't have functionality, and as a result, that increases the workload on the back office teams, but also delivers a poorer level of service to the front line. I think the key thing there is to be thinking about kind of mobile apps. One of the things that I think will probably make everybody feel really old is that speaking to suppliers, they're telling us that for millennials, websites are considered retro. It's all apps these days. So the fact that a website is retro certainly made me feel my age. The third example that I wanted to give you is where the lack of integration is causing a challenge, and it concerns skills competency. So skills competency's got two components, a theoretical component, which is mostly managed in our HR system, iTrent, and a practical component, which is mostly managed in our operational training system, PDR Pro. When a firefighter returns from training or an incident, they'll verbally update their watch commander or crew commander, and if that information affects their skills competency, the crew commander or watch commander will manually enter that information. If it's RVDS, they'll send an email to central to corporate admin. If it's whole time, then that information will be entered into an e-form or entered into a spreadsheet. When that gets to central staffing, that is then updated into the whole time rostering system. So there's no automatic transfer of information. And I was going to say it was a clear example of duplication of effort, but it's actually an example of triplication of effort, which I had to double check was a verb, and it is a verb. So we are doing that in triplicate. So that in itself has got a number of issues, not least of which there's the risk of the delays of that information getting into the rostering system to then help inform mobilisation decisions. And depending on operational activity, it can be days before that information is updated. So hopefully those examples create a bit of a picture. I don't want to create an overly negative picture, because obviously people are still working hard. The service is still delivering a good quality service to its communities. But if we had the report card, I think it would be saying could do better in some of those back office areas.
Thanks, Paul. The examples bring it very much to life and are fairly horrifying. And I don't doubt that people are doing everything they possibly can do in extremely difficult circumstances. Well, I'll open up to questions. Does anybody get any questions to Paul before I've got a couple? No. Oh, Angelina, then Brian.
Thank you. So it's at 5.3, Paul, where we're flagging the intention is to buy off the shelf, so no bespoke customization, and then we go on to say therefore we'll need to compromise on some of our ways of doing. I am paraphrasing. I think my thought would be this, Paul. Several times I've found myself in organisations who have at the time insisted on bespoke customization because their way is, the only way, etc., etc. And then a few years down the line have deeply regretted not taking the opportunity of that external stimulus to change and modernise. And so, if the off-the-shelf thing has been developed in line with industry standards worldwide, and I'm quoting your paper and using that language, there's likely reasons for it. So that's the backdrop to a gentle challenge I'm offering for the word compromise in this context. because my suggestion is it's not the best mindset managerially to use the language of compromise. Actually, I think that external catalyst for reviewing and, you know, self-challenging, why are we out of step with whatever the rest of the industry worldwide? You see where I'm coming from. So I'm just suggesting that maybe it is to be embraced, or at least, you know, accepted more open-mindedly than compromise would suggest, because that kind of language washes through the rest of people's mindset, doesn't it? So there's just the thought I'm offering.
Paul, do you want to come back on that at all?
Yeah, and to be honest, that's the second time that particular word has been picked up. I was speaking to one of the other groups internally, and that word did make folk anxious. So I think what the guidance there is that I've turned that into a positive, and I think that's something that absolutely need to do.
Yeah, no, very, very good steer, Angelina, and thanks for the response, Paul. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I agree, your examples, as they have done before, really bring it to life. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment, if I may. But just to kind of echo Angelina's point, you know, having had responsibility for a major IT projects across over 50 organizations, each of whom argued that they were unique and different. I bear the scars of struggling to persuade people that you're actually not that different. And you know what? Just because you want it doesn't justify that it's needed. So I really sort of support that, you know, the principles of what's been covered there. Just to go back to the examples, and it's not, I don't mean in this in any sort of critical way, Paul, but you know, I read the paper, and it's not until I really hear your examples that I really get a sense, and I do wonder whether we're kind of missing an opportunity here, because, and maybe it's just because I've got a super simple outlook in life and limited capacity to think beyond simple. But it's about understanding what is the problem that we're trying to fix. And even in conceptual terms, to sort of compare the as is to the to be. And the most effective ways I've seen that being presented is some sort of drawing, you know, just in very high level. And I also feel that, you know, at the formative stages here, we need to hear a little bit more about the benefits, you know, and, you know, in articulating those benefits. And I appreciate quantifying some of these benefits is terribly difficult. But in part, you know, from a governance perspective, we need to understand that there is a decent view of what the benefits are, to do two things in particular. One, to establish whether the project of change is consistent with the strategic context of change for the organization. And secondly, at a more granular level, that the investment in the change is actually justified, so that the benefits outweigh, you know, in broad terms, the costs. And I wonder if this is in terms of how, you know, the documentation is put together and presented, you know, maybe these are things that could be considered, and I suspect they're already being considered. So, and maybe it's for Andy, and maybe it's for Ross, and I'm not entirely sure who the points are directed to, but I just wanted to make them, and hopefully they serve some purpose.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And just to add to that before I bring in the hands that are up, the piece around the benefits and what problem are we trying to fix also feeds into an overall conversation that should be happening continuously in terms of prioritization. So, you know, having that high level understanding of what problem we're trying to fix, how much it's going to cost, and what are the benefits are clearly critical ingredients in understanding our overall portfolio of change and where we should best direct scarce resources. So I know that's very simple, but it's actually not. But it all plays into a complex picture that without a whole portfolio, it makes it quite difficult for us, I think, to always make sensible business decisions. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio. It was just to offer to Brian if I can come back on the benefits point in the progress update that I'll give a little bit later on in the agenda. So I'll touch on benefits if that's okay. And on your earlier point, really around the examples that Paul has given in his update, but trying to make that a consistent theme around how we provide updates around the major change going forward is one that I fully support. Storytelling, can be very, very effective in terms of providing updates. Curtis and I have already started to engage on conversations internally about the need for business architecture, which gives us that illustrative view of change across the organisation, and that's something that we would like to drive internally as well. But clearly we have to have a conversation with the organisation in terms of what that would mean. So just very supportive of that, and I'll come back to benefits in my update.
Thanks, Andy. Curtis?
Thanks, Chair. Curtis Montgomery, Change Centre of Excellence Manager. So just a couple of very brief points on that. I can support Paul in some of my experience with developing future state blueprints, to Brian's point. And I think it's important to bring that kind of enterprise view that Andy was talking about into the picture that helps to set out the technology that's going to be used in the future and how it's supported by the teams and how they work around it, and what are the major business processes that cut across the organisation and what the impacts are in all of those different areas, because that helps you measure the effectiveness of what you're doing to the point around about benefits. So we're developing a benefits toolkit that will help us define those benefits and profile them, and then help to roll that out as we go into business change. I think the point around about the enterprise architecture is really interesting, because it's all about delivering capabilities into the organization at different points through a change life cycle. And capabilities can be systems, different ways of working, business processes, it can be all sorts of different things. So it's how you link that all together. And I'm very happy to support on that, Paul. So I know we've got time together, so let's catch up on that.
That's helpful. Thanks, Curtis. And no doubt we'll be talking a lot more around business architecture and what that means and the implications as we go forward.
Yeah.
Stuart.
Stuart Ballingall, board member. Thanks, Fiona. I just wanted to comment slightly on the benefits piece again. There's a comment in the paper, I think it's 4.2, that states that the project will define the benefits, but a different set of people or whoever will be responsible for delivering those benefits. And it just seems to me there's an opportunity there for someone to fall down a gap, particularly when we're not particularly sophisticated yet on benefits analysis and tracking, etc. So it was just an observation that my experience would dictate you need to really get folk on the hook for benefits realisation, or it's quite tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had a couple of questions, one of which has already been raised by Angelina on 5.3, and Brian's already covered some of the other comments I had, but I do have one remaining one, which is around, it's under 5.1. It talks about a constraint being the expiration of legacy contracts. And the whole-time rostering solution is due to expire in December 2022. That's not very far away, clearly. I just wondered what's the feeling in terms of extending that, or whether we will have something sensible to replace it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a number of contracts within the overall PTFES programme that we do have to maintain. I think, as I mentioned in 5.1 or something, there is a bit of a conflict just in terms of making sure we only extend them for as long as we need them. But until we've done the procurement, until we have a detailed implementation plan, then we can't be 100% sure about that. But we do know we will have to extend it beyond December 2022. Given that the coming financial year, the main focus is going to be around the the things that you've talked about already about defining benefits, about actually getting to a business case, defining statement of requirements and doing the procurement. So yeah, we will be extending beyond December 22, and we've been started discussions with procurement on that.
Right, okay, that was my next question. So we know, and we're having the conversations. Okay, that's good. Thanks very much, Paul, and everybody. I can find my agenda. That takes us on then to the suite of papers on RVDS. David, welcome.
Thanks, Chair. David Farris, Head of Operations. Obviously, I'm here to present the suite of documents in relation to the movement around about the RVDS improvement programme. And I'm just going to go through them and cover some salient points and take any questions that you may have. The first document within the pack is a RVDS improvement programme framework document. This is to support the overall improvement programme, and it's a method that I've used in a couple of other projects that we've got running through the operations function. And I'm really quite keen on this approach because it allows us to present to the organisation, particularly firefighters on fire stations, exactly the approach we're taking to trying to address some of the challenges within the improvement programme of work. It's worked well with the operational strategy so far, and we've had positive feedback, so we've extended it to some of the other work that we're doing. Makes it very clear what the nature of the programme is, what our approach is, and what we aim to do through the lifetime of the programme. Section 2.1 in the framework document really highlights our aim statement, which is our overall aim for the programme itself. And within diagram 1 in the framework document, we can see the 5 objectives that we settled on through that large process in the transition from initially SDMP RVDS strategy onto the identification of the individual programme of works, and then 5 objectives gathered from that process. And it takes us now down from the 5 objectives to the 3 project work streams, and those are detailed in diagram 1. Those 3 projects are the 3 individual dossiers, which I'll present on just very shortly. Section 2.2 starts to take us through a programme overview and provides individual outcome aims for each of the strands. Section 3 goes on to cover the resources and how we are managing those for the programme of work. And you'll see that what we're applying is effectively a matrix management approach where we've allocated individual project leads. They'll be using their teams and their resources as a bolt-on to their BAU, and all of that will be supported by the RVDS support team, which has been a fantastic asset to the organisation since its inception and continues to support both RVDS business as usual and also the wider projects and the programme. In fact, we are presenting a case for change today at the RVDS Improvement Programme Board around about cementing that team in place and also bolstering it until the completion of the programme, which is anticipated for June 2023. The next section, section 4, is around governance, and you will recall from the presentation of the previous programme dossier at a previous change committee that the NRVLF, the National Retained and Volunteer Leadership Forum, remains extant, and that is a very effective forum. We do have trade union representation on that forum in the form of the FRSA. The Fire Brigades Union have been invited to that forum but have declined to attend because they won't attend if another trade union is present. The FRSA is a trade union who directly deal with retained firefighters across the UK and have been a great asset on the forum to provide their views. From the NRVLF, any business papers are escalated through the RVDS Improvement Programme Board, and I've actually stepped out of that board just now to attend this board. That too is working particularly well with ACO Stuart Stevens chairing that. Then escalation beyond will be through SMB and SLT as appropriate, and obviously onwards to yourselves at Change Committee. So that covers the framework, and I think it does set out and paint a very clear picture to the reader in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and then clearly a lot more detail is contained within the three dossiers. I wasn't intending going into a massive amount of discussion, of detail in terms of presenting those dossiers. Suffice to say that the first dossier covers our responding options and
David,
yes.
So sorry to cut across you. Just two tiny wee questions around your framework document, which I think we've said before. Really like the approach, very, very clear. The first question was around unions, which you've answered. So FRSA attend and FBU won't, because FRSA are there at the National Volunteer Leadership Forum.
Yes.
Is that their normal modus operandi, the FBU?
Yes, that's an executive
Okay.
council decision. So yeah, we I think quite rightly invited both representative bodies for our RVDS colleagues, and the FRSA were very quick to respond and attended a meeting, and their attendance negated the other trade union from attending.
Bonkers. Yeah. My other question, small point, but you said something there around, if I heard you right, resources, some activity being a bolt-on to their BAU role. My question is around how we track that. So if we're looking at the overall cost of a project, then arms and legs, if you like, form part of that cost. I can see Andy nodding. Is there a mechanism to capture those bolt-on activities? And if there isn't, are we planning to have one? Andy, do you want to, or David, sorry. Andy, who?
On you go, David, on you go.
I was going to actually just mention that, you know, that this isn't unusual, but it does become challenging. And clearly there's an absorption of and hidden, I suppose, cost in terms of the individual's role within the organisation. The RVDS support team is that dedicated resource that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, as it were. But no, absolutely, there will be people who will be using this in a kind of dual role. And at the moment, I'm certainly not tracking that as the SRO, but I think Andy's maybe going to contribute here.
On you go, Andy.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio. Just to come back in on that point, so the latter part of the question is yes, the plan is to start tracking the resources that are allocated within our projects, and that addresses the updated position statement within the portfolio dashboard cover paper, where the portfolio office will look at how we introduce those capabilities going forward. How that's done today, I think I've mentioned it, but just to re-emphasise to committee members, actually revenue costs are tracked quite well from a financial perspective across our change initiatives in the portfolio. It's the other side of it. It's our capital expenditure is not brought together with the revenue costs to give us that total cost view of projects across the portfolio today. So for programmes such as this, often a business case will be developed to allow those project members to participate on the project, and then finance or finance business partner network starts to track those revenue costs. But it's the intention in the portfolio function to bring all of that together as one and have a tracking system in place. We're just not there yet.
No, that's reassuring. Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I absolutely understand the point. I think my caution and perhaps reticence is that there has to be very rigorous guidance as to what we're trying to track here, or you end up with an industry moving beans around boxes for no purpose whatsoever.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, there's a materiality piece. I fully agree with that. David.
Yeah, I think it's probably interesting to note as well that due to the nature of some of the work contained within these projects, much of it is the extension of BAU activity anyway. So in terms of streamlining current processes, when we talk about recruitment and attraction, as an example, there will be work ongoing that is being demonstrably evidenced through the programme but has also been worked on, would have been worked on as a strand anyway. So effectively we're pulling together and making sure that we're capturing lots of work that was going on within individual functions and having a holistic overview in terms of the RVDS programme itself. So I think Stuart's point's very well made, that you could be blurring the lines on occasion, and it might be quite difficult to extricate in terms of a time and motion study exactly what you were doing at any given time to contribute towards the programme.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I think it's a common sense approach, isn't it, to give us the best assessment of cost without creating an industry. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, there's a lot of information here, and there's obviously already been a lot of work undertaken in relation to RVDS, and I guess part of what I would like to be reminded of is just, you know, what's been done and what have we kind of learned, because there appears to be an inference that we're still a bit light on the data, you know, talking about you know, resources, availability, capacity, and in a sense this kind of goes back to my earlier question about understanding the problem we're trying to fix here. You know, so there's issues about recruitment, retention, there's issues around about facilities, there's clearly issues about community demand and community need, and there seems to be an as I say, an inference that until we do more work, we won't fully really understand all of that correctly. But I just wanted to check if that is the case, and if it's not the case, do we already have the data that tells us all these things, and therefore we have a much clearer view on what it is we're trying to fix?
Thanks, Brian. David?
I would probably suggest that it's maybe the flip side of that. I think we've got an inordinate amount of data. I think it's about choosing the right data and understanding through those three particular projects and the milestones and the elements that we've created in those. I think we've set out quite an ambitious plan to ensure that we can address what we know are the problems. I think to give you a bit of comfort, I think we absolutely understand what the challenges are, and most of that is because of the very close relationship between communities and local fire stations, and understanding where the pinch points are and the challenges lie, and then looking at our organisation and seeing how we can marry up to those challenges a little bit better, and particularly in elements that I've identified through the project, so attraction, recruitment, how we respond, how we train, and a whole myriad of factors that will cumulatively improve life for RVDS firefighters in their role.
Yeah, just on one thing. Thanks, Davey. One of the things that, you know, my eyes get drawn to is the idea that there needs to be a revised target operating model here, and it's just really to ask the question of how that might be developed. Is it going to be a kind of bottom-up process based on risk and need, or is there a strategic view of what the service in these communities needs? How is that likely to be determined?
Yeah, there's two elements, and there's one of the I suppose one of the areas that we've identified is the interdependencies and the dependencies between the three projects that we've set up. So there's a number of areas that are actually looking at that very point. So without going into a very, very long answer, we've got, as Paul just highlighted, for the 8 different legacy rostering systems, we've effectively got 8 different ways of applying what would be an establishment figure to an RVDS fire station. And we need to address that. But actually, to think about standardising that is probably the wrong approach, because we now, in terms of that data that I've just discussed, we have lots of information to allow us to understand risk in area, and to probably match our resources to the risk a little bit more intuitively than we previously did when we applied arbitrary figures. Another factor in this, which is around about the station establishments matched with the RVDS variable contract options. Now that's highly dependent on the agreement or the terms and conditions, because we have no scope to change any contracts at the moment. But we know that if we apply a flexible contract for our RVDS staff, we can staff stations differently based on risk at the time of day, and therefore that would then have a knock-on effect on the target operating model or the establishment figure. Because if we were to work, for example, to a percentage value, it would not be a number of firefighters that staffed a station, it would be percentage coverage. So to report against a target operating model, which is a figure, is probably a thing of the past. And our project is looking to develop the relationship between offering different contract types, understanding the risk in areas, and matching the resource to the risk and to the types of contracts that we can offer to try and provide a 24/7, if required, availability within a station, a cluster of stations, or a wider area. And that's another piece of work that we've not really done, is consider how we might pool resources together to cover risk at different times. So we're working really closely with colleagues from SDMP on that trim as well. And so there's a number of factors that are playing into that station establishments discussion.
Thanks for that, David, and really interested to see the product of that effort in due course. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks. We'll let you get on with the rest part, David. Sorry for hijacking that, but some really useful points and discussion there.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and I think I've probably started to pull out some of the detail that's contained within the dossiers through that discussion anyway. So it's time well spent. I was just moving on to the first dossier, which is responding options and duty system relationships. And again, that one has, as you'll probably have picked up, has direct links to the CCF project, PTFAS, and SDMP. Section 2 highlights the objectives, and then we go into the deep detail around about the milestones under Section 8 with the anticipated benefits listed at Section 17. That 8% that's referred to is the retention rate. So effectively, on average, over the period. Now, COVID has had an impact, but we have an 8% average leaver rate for our RVDS. So that's the baseline measure that we're using for retention. The next dossier is on attraction and recruitment, and I would guess this is probably perceived to be the highest profile, because it's about onboarding members of staff. It's about the public-facing part before people join the service. So we're applying lots of innovation around about what we do in communities to both advertise, to attract, to prepare candidates for selection testing, and to bring them through the system. And we've done a full process mapping exercise with colleagues from service improvement to understand the recruitment process and the idiosyncrasies that are applied across the country. And suffice to say, there were a myriad different approaches across different areas of the service, although that was seen as being a standard approach. So the process mapping exercise was something that the forum commissioned prior, and you'll see that milestone is already met. So we now have that and another understanding of the recruitment processes, and are currently working through that. The third area is the variable contract options in station establishments. I've kind of covered a bit of that, or there is a lot more to it, as you can imagine, and we need to understand once we have something in terms of RVDS T's and C's finalised, what our variable contract options may look like. But there's lots and lots of scope for doing some fantastic work there to ensure that we both provide 24/7 availability where possible, but also that we're able to, in terms of tying back to the attraction and recruitment element, we're able to attract individuals from all walks of life with different backgrounds and different home circumstances, and be able to accommodate them within our service to also enhance our diversity and our inclusion within the service. I think that was kind of a whistle stop at the three dossiers, but more than happy to take any further questions, Chair.
No, thanks, David. Any further questions for David? No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Stuart.
Sorry, Fiona, I just had an observation. David, I thought your papers were excellent. Thank you. I think when we look at your framework document and your governance section, I think you'd probably describe it as rigorous. And I think we'll need to be a bit fleet of foot, all of us, to make sure the programme's not over-governed, because there's quite a few layers in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Can I just respond on that, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I think that's to a certain degree by design, Stuart, in as much as that what I've tried to recognise there is that I would like to apply the requisite level of decision making to the requisite group within the organisation. So I understand the potential escalation for terms and conditions or wholesale change would need that full escalation to SLT and potentially board. But I also wanted to be able to capture the fact that for example, the leadership forum is also an empowered decision-making forum, and there are things that I guess with my judgment as the SRO, we should be able to progress at the appropriate level within the organisation, because I'm very conscious of pushing everything to the top when it's not necessarily required.
No, thanks. Okay, thank you very much. And moving on then to the final part of this section, Paul, PT-FAS.
Thank you. Yeah, so just some things to highlight from the update that's before you. We've pretty much concluded for the People Payroll Finance project, we've concluded the engagement that we're doing with the back office, and the focus is very much now on engagement with service delivery. And the 5 key themes that are coming out of the engagement we're having with service delivery are around simpler processes. At the risk of becoming a one-trick pony and being the guy who just gives loads of examples, there's an example of a form with a number of authorization steps. When we questioned why that was, it was because that was what was on the form that was used to create this new form. So there wasn't necessarily any kind of sense checking. It's just, well, that's what it was for the previous form. So let's go with that. And where you could potentially criticise somebody in admin for that, the question has to be, why is that not being queried at any of the kind of the further stages? Another example of a form where it's never been rejected. So why are we asking for it to be authorised in the first place if nobody ever rejects it? What's the point of asking for authorisation? Other things, people asking for the systems to be easy to use. I think for me that's been one of the kind of the part of the learning journey for me. While I thought it was important, I'm now realising it's fundamental to the adoption of the systems as we go forward. Integration, we've seen an example around skills competency, using personal devices for non-operational activities. There seems to be a lot of support for that as part of the digital strategy. I think I may have mentioned this the previous Change Committee, there was 65% of respondents were willing to use their own devices, where it would help them do things like submit leave, query pay slips, things like that. Another example, we spoke to a firefighter who had to drive 60-mile round trip to hand in a paper form. It's the kind of thing that's we could avoid, and that visibility of your own data, to whether it's Toil or your training record. These are the 5 key themes that are coming out of our engagement with service delivery. In terms of the business case that we're doing on the People Payroll Finance, we commissioned Moore Insight to work with us on that, to deliver the 5 case model following that HM Treasury guidance. We got the first draft of that last week. We submitted it for an independent health check. We went through that on Friday last week. We got loads of feedback that we're now working on, making sure that we incorporate into that document. But as it says in the highlight report, the key finding is that while it might look like our systems costs are low, we're actually paying an awful lot of money to manually keep the lights on, and that's where our costs actually are. So we're working on the feedback to make sure that that's a strong business case. And we've done a lot of work on the benefits. One of the tabs in the business case is I think it's run to about 75 different processes where we're trying to demonstrate where we could have benefits. I recognise that's only the first stage of it. We need to make sure that we're being mature and assigning owners and actually seeing those benefits through to the end, and we'll be working with Curtis and the portfolio office to make sure that we're developing a rigorous approach to that. It's not just a matter of recording them now and then hoping for the best. We're also making progress on the statement of requirements for the People Payroll Finance project. We've seen the first draft of it. We need to be a bit more work just to make sure that it closely aligns to the UK Cabinet Office Global Design Principles for HR and Finance, and that's the thing that will make it standard. So in that area, we've got that safeguard of that there are UK government standards for HR and finance. On the rostering side, not so much. So we don't necessarily have that safeguard, but that's just something we need to keep an eye on. On the rostering project, I think the key thing there is that that's starting to gain the same momentum that the People Payroll Finance project has. We've appointed a project executive, we've appointed a project manager. They are looking at putting together a project board, developing a project plan and the necessary governance. We've done a fair chunk of analysis on that, and that's where some of those examples that I gave earlier came from. We're speaking to quite a few fire services down south. We've got a call with London Fire later on this morning to see what they're doing with rostering. And that will take us to being a bit more of an intelligent client before we go out to the market to do our market engagement, issue our prior information notice, and get suppliers in to tell us how could their systems help us deal with some of the challenges that I've outlined already. In terms of the budget, I think everything that I've talked about does require investment. And we could potentially ask, have we necessarily invested in things like the RVDS, the rostering system, if we're still looking at a situation whereby we have 8 legacy systems? So we'll be working very closely in finance to understand, firstly, where all the costs will come from, whether that's backfill costs, programme team costs, supplier costs, licence costs, across all the different projects within the programme. Try to understand where the savings will come from, but crucially understand what does the service think is affordable. So that's just an introduction to the update.
No, that's really helpful, Paul. I had a question about benchmarking, but you've partly answered that. So you're speaking to London. I'm sure we've asked this before. Are you talking to other organisations out with fire effectively?
On the rostering side or on the People Payroll Finance?
On the bigger piece.
Yeah, so on the People Payroll Finance, for example, we've spoken to Student Loans Scottish Government. Scottish Government have just awarded a contract, are in the process of awarding a contract to Oracle for an ERP for their HR and finance system. So we've had a good look at their business case. We've got their statement of requirements. They're also very closely aligning to those global design principles that I mentioned. So yes, we definitely are speaking to other organisations. On the rostering side, so far, to be honest, we've only spoken to fire services. But there's maybe a task here to make sure that we're speaking to maybe commercial organisations who do rostering as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And my other question was around the business case. What are the next key steps and the timescales associated with that?
So we're working on Moore Insight are working on the feedback, and they've committed to delivering an updated business case for the 14th of February. We have in the diaries a workshop for the programme board to deep dive that business case on the 17th of February. We then have, it's called a Technical Assurance Framework review from Scottish Government's Digital Assurance Office on the 28th of February. That's where they would, it's called a Business Justification Gateway Review. They will look at the business case, so we're looking to interview people internally and make sure that the purpose of that is to make sure that we're on a sound footing before we go into the procurement stage. So we aim to have all that completed by March. we had a planning meeting with the Scottish Government on Tuesday. They introduced a few more things that they're looking to see that we don't necessarily have in place just yet. So we're just we're going to have a little bit of a regroup after that planning meeting yesterday and just see, are we still going to be on track for doing that justification gateway on the 28th of February? We might have to have a wee bit of movement on that one, but we haven't had that discussion as of yet.
Okay, thanks. Nick?
Hi, Paul. Nick Barr, board member. Paul, very, very short point here. Could I just ask you at least to give some thought to perhaps looking at the ambulance service in terms of what they do for Rossray, in so much they're much smaller, just 2 people, but emergency response service and very easy to access, I should imagine, for yourself. So just a thought. Perfect, will do. If there's any contact details that anybody could provide, that would be hugely appreciated.
Thanks. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just a couple of points from me. It feels as if the development of the business case and the procurement process are running kind of in parallel, which feels a bit odd. Not least of all because certainly in the earlier stages there was a lack of understanding of what this project might actually cost, and part of the selection process of what is the solution we're going to go for has to be on cost, and therefore I would appreciate some assurance that before the procurement process moves in earnest, that there will be a clear evidence that that business case has been completed and rigorously assessed. My personal view is something like that should come back to this committee, but clearly within the timescales of our meetings, that wouldn't seem to be possible unless we have a separate meeting to do that. My second point was on the Digital Assurance Office gateway review. I just wanted to be clear whether that is a technical review where they will look critically at the statement of requirements, the specification, to give us an independent perspective on whether that's reasonable, overly ambitious, therefore overly risk. So just really understanding the nature, because I have seen some of these reviews in the past that have actually been relatively superficial.
Yep. Okay, to come back on that.
Yep.
So starting with that technical review, so we had the initial health check on the business case. We had a 5-hour feedback session on Friday. So I certainly felt that I'd been through a rigorous process by Friday afternoon. I think the business justification process will be rigorous. There'll be interviews with 14 stakeholders throughout the organisation. But on your specific point about the statement of requirements, they won't be reviewing that at this gateway review. That would be the subsequent pre-procurement gateway review is where they would go into the detail of that one. But my expectation is that it will be rigorous. Because my anxiety levels are high, so that's why I think it will be very rigorous from what I've seen so far on the business case review.
Brian?
Yeah, sorry, Paul. I'm not really sure I understood your response in relation to the process for approving the business case and ensuring that goes through kind of due process. Including, in my opinion, coming to this committee. And just to go back on the digital assurance stuff, if that pre-procurement gateway review is the point that they look in detail at the statement of requirements or the specification, is it a possibility that at that point they will say, actually, you're being overly ambitious here, and therefore you should stop doing what you're planning to do and do something different?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. There'll be 4 gateway reviews in total. The first is a business justification that we're going through. Then the next will be pre-procurement, when they'll look at that in detail at the statement of requirements and our route to market. There's then a a delivery gateway review and a go live gateway review further down the line. At any of those gateway reviews, they can give us a red stop assessment, and that it would only be if we had ministerial approval to proceed, is what the guidance. So absolutely, they could say stop at any of those gateway reviews, which is also adding to my anxiety levels. But we are working hard to make sure that we understand everything that's required for those gateways, and we'll make sure that we are in a good shape before we do them. Which is why we did the independent health check on the business case. That wasn't a requirement of the gateway review, so we decided to do that before it goes to the gateway review. Similarly, we can get an independent health check on the statement of requirements before it goes into the pre-procurement gateway review. In terms of the governance process for that business case, I'll take advice from the portfolio office and what that route should be, and I also will take it the appropriate route.
Can I suggest, Brian, I don't know if you want back in, but just on the business case piece, can we take an action to look into that and come back to the Change Committee and confirm when we will see that, and whether we need to have something in advance of the May meeting? Brian, do you want back in?
No, that's fine, Fiona, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Stuart?
Thanks, Fiona. Hey, Paul, I had noted a very similar observation to Angelina earlier on around the choice of system. I think it was 3.5 in your, and I think what we're essentially saying is that the project approach, both this and rostering, is we're going to adapt our processes to a new system rather than bastardize a new system to our old processes. And I absolutely, I think that's the right approach. But I was just looking for a little bit of assurance that the areas that are going to be impacted by having to change their processes are bought into that approach and will be providing the appropriate support.
Yeah, absolutely. So what in terms of the project plans, the next year, although I've said it's all about procurement, in tandem it's about business readiness for that change. So although we don't necessarily know what the future system would be, who would be that solution provider, the fact that our statement of requirements very closely aligns to the global design principles, it means we know what the processes are going to be like. So if we've got processes, whether it's COVID reporting is probably a good example where you have to do these very involved processes. If we look at what the absence reporting process is and those global design principles, then we can start to identify the gap, and then we can be starting to warm the teams to look. This is how things are going to be different. So we have been socialising that and talking to the different teams about what that change is actually going to mean. I suspect it's still sounding a wee bit theoretical to them, and I think what we've asked for in terms of resources to bring people out of the directorates to work specifically on the projects with us full time, and their three main tasks are going to be looking at processes, looking at data, and getting the business ready for the change that's coming down the line.
Yeah, that sounds helpful in terms of the detailed processes, but are you absolutely confident that at the highest level, the various directors are bought into the principle that their processes are going to have to change?
I suspect we would have to ask the highest level of directors that question. I've certainly been talking about the need to stay standard, and we've agreed that is what we need to do. When push comes to shove and they don't see the report that they're used to, things are different. Maybe when staff aren't particularly happy with processes or changes, that may be a different matter. But the point of this coming year is to get folk ready for that change and start giving folk some more concrete examples, so we can this theoretical of adopt not adapt, but actually say, look, there's a global design principle, there's how you're doing absence reporting. That's what we mean. So that's the work that will be coming next financial year.
Fiona, it seems pretty critical assumption in both of these programs. In fact, it probably should be in all programs, but in these particular, because we are saying that is the key assumption of these programs. So Before we go much further, I don't know where the appropriate place is, but it seemed to me that that needs to be confirmed.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, but that the overall, you used the phrase there, Paul, when push comes to shove. I think we all know that you can go, yeah, until something changes the way you do things or your team does things. So I feel another action coming on in terms of, and Andy, you put your hand up. Can you have a look at that senior level buy-in to the need for change? And it isn't just about this programme, but in the context of PT-FAS, I think that would be helpful just to revisit that and keep it alive and recognise it as a risk. Andy, then Ross.
Thanks, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio, and the DEP might want to come in and say something similar on this, but I think it's well stated through the programme board for PT-FAS that the executive level and a senior responsible owner level and at an SLT level, the general principle is aligned on the fact that we will not bespoke processes and that we will go for a standard commercially off-the-shelf product. But now what we're talking about is a management of change issue, that when we start to implement that product and look to embed it across the organisation, only then will we start to learn what the outcomes of that may be, and whether or not there may be some resistance to that. So there's a lot of work that has to be done up front before we even get into that implementation phase. But I think I can speak on behalf of the organisation that principle is well agreed to, Stuart. But I will let the DEP come in and offer his perspective.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And my tuppence worth, I don't doubt that at all. It's just when you get to my age, you know that it's when the rubber hits the road, you can hit some bumps. So it's just the weather eye to be kept on that. Ross, do you want to add to that at all?
I feel a bit of a fraud trying to add to that, because I think Andy's articulated it extremely well. The only thing that I would probably emphasise is that the Senior Management Board, which is the responsible executive board for all things change, has every single head of function within the organisation represented on it. We escalate things as necessary up to SLT, which clearly has all the directors on it. And we've also got a specific programme board in place for PT-FAS as well. So there are ample opportunities for the most senior leaders in the organisation to input to all projects and programmes, including this one. And as Andy says, we have had our fingers burnt, pardon the pun, on so many occasions for developing bespoke solutions to suit a perceived uniqueness of the fire and rescue service, that we need to move away from that. And there is absolutely a recognition amongst all senior leaders within the organisation sitting on SLT and SMB that we need to procure systems that are used by organisations the world over, and there's nothing particularly unique about us in terms of our use of those systems. Clearly, and I think you used the where the rubber hits the road, clearly there will be some wrinkles in that process, but it's up to people like me to work with directors and heads of function to smooth those specific things out. But we are absolutely all aligned as senior leaders in the direction of travel here, and everybody's given ample opportunities to input to it. Thanks. Thanks,
Ross. I've suggested that we take an action in terms of business readiness. I'm satisfied with that conversation, but I'll just check with the rest of the committee. Do you wish a specific action taken, or are you comfortable with that? And obviously it's something we'll look at on a regular basis.
I'm comfortable with it. Okay,
no action, but thank you very much for a robust explanation, and we'll, as we say, keep an eye on it. Paul, anything further from you?
No, that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Look forward to hearing loads more from you in the committee meetings to come, and clearly we'll find out what the route is and timescales for the business case coming back to Change Committee. So thank you.
Thank you.
I've spectacularly ruined the timetable for today, so I will move swiftly on to Portfolio Office Progress Update and PVG Spotlight Review. Andy, can I appeal to you? We've all read the papers, so and I know you do this anyway, but salient points, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio, so I'll be as quick and brief as I can. Obviously happy to answer any questions that you might have. So in terms of just pulling out some of the salient points, Action 2 in the report, as you can see, these sessions have now been concluded in terms of the strategy awareness, received very well across the organisation. Everybody's open-minded, but it goes back to the comment we made earlier about when the rubber hits the road, of course. But that will be a continuous activity. That it doesn't really stop, is what I'm trying to say. That's just something that we'll continue to engage on as we look to introduce new capabilities across the organisation. A bit of a common theme through some of our chat today is that of boiling the ocean. So what I want to be really clear on is that our goal here is not to boil the ocean, but our goal here is to highlight with the committee some of the fundamental capabilities that we believe that are gaps across the organisation, but to try and give some assurance that we'll be looking to take a light touch as much as possible where a light touch is appropriate and proportionate to what we're doing there. In terms of Action 3, formalisation of the Portfolio Office strategy, we now have a first draft of that document in place. Next steps for that is to go through our governance arrangements internally. It'll go to SMB before passing over to our corporate branding team to have that finalised and made to look nice. Couldn't think of a better explanation there in terms of what that would be, and then that can be shared with the committee for review and their input on that as well. In terms of Action 5, the business change life cycle, phase 1, update on that is that we've now concluded 5 out of 7 internal workshops on the outline business change life cycle. I've been speaking about this for a long time now, but we're making some real tangible progress on that. The Portfolio Office team held another workshop this week on Tuesday to start mapping the sub-processes, the lower levels, which will be reflective of the front end of that business change life cycle. So in essence, what will be our intake phase coming into the portfolio. It will look at how we ensure strategic alignment, prioritisation, benefits integration with the business case, all of that type of stuff. And we'll be looking to schedule a spotlight session fairly soon with this committee in terms of what that's starting to look like. So, Chair, I'll coordinate with you offline in terms of potential dates for spotlight sessions.
Yep, no, that'd be great. Thank you.
Just to conclude on a couple of points, Action 6, Portfolio Office Function Recruitment. We've already welcomed and introduced Curtis today. Curtis has already started to make real significant inroads on some of the work that we're looking to progress. In addition to that, we're also making good progress on the benefits management and master planning roles. Those roles are now going through job evaluation in preparation for going out to recruitment. So some good progress being made there. We've kind of touched on the financial reporting aspects across the portfolio, as well as benefits and business cases. So I'm not going to kind of labour that point. Work is going on internally with Marcus Jenks and John Thompson's team. And once we have something tangible, once finance clear their feet in terms of the annual budgeting cycle, I think we'll start to make some real progress there, as we already have an outline of some of those financial tools. And just to conclude on action 10, which is to inform the members that we do now have a first draft of a functional roadmap for the portfolio office, as well as a strategic timeline roadmap for the change portfolio. And the intention now is to look to share that both internally and with the committee. We're just now looking to determine the best way in which we do that and make those roadmaps accessible, because it is within a cloud-based system. So we're just trying to figure that out at the moment, to be perfectly honest. So that's some kind of key salient points out of the progress update. What's not within that progress update that I wanted to cite the committee on is this week we've just kicked off an internal audit of the portfolio function. So our audit partners, Assets, are in the building and working with me and the team in terms of looking at our management practice approach. A bit of insight for the committee there is that I'd done quite a bit of preparation work before Assets came in to highlight what I felt our current position was as a function, so that we were really open and transparent with them, and so that they didn't, as auditors, take an approach to, for want of a better expression, beat us over the head with a stick, knowing that we already know where we have challenges and gaps. So they have agreed to take an advisory approach in terms of the findings and recommendations that they may make. So that is ongoing for the next 2 weeks to cite the committee, but I'll invite any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Andy. Where does that internal audit report go governance-wise? Remind me.
That will go.
Brian might help. He's waving at me.
Good governance and ARAC, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. ARAC is the default position, but I mean, there's quite clearly a substantial interest for this committee. So yeah. I suggest it should also come to this committee.
Yeah.
And then we just coordinate what we do and when we do it.
Agreed.
Okay, so we've got an action there to look at the timelines, etc. And ARAC and change should see it. Yep, that's fine.
Yep.
Any other? Sorry, Andy, on you go.
No, just agreeing.
Okay. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think you said earlier that you were going to come back to the issue of benefits when you did this. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about that. And just all of the actions in this report look like they'll be concluded by the end of March. And I think what would be kind of interesting is to know a little bit in due course about what's next, you know, what happens. And one specific round about the business case process, having done the evaluation of the current process, the introduction presumably of a new process, and whether that new process will, for example, be used with the PT FAST business case. Just wondering how quickly it will be operationalized.
Okay, so I'll come back on your last question first, so I don't forget it, Brian, in terms of PT FAST and the business case development there. So PT FAST are actually working with Moore Insights at the moment in terms of development of the business case. So that they're following the guidance from the 5-case model from the HM Treasury. Because of the scale of the programme, they have to be in alignment with that particular framework and that process. So it's not necessarily going through our internal business case process as it is. So hopefully that addresses that point. In terms of the progress being made and what the next steps would look like, it is starting to engage this committee now on some spotlight sessions and workshops around here's some of the progress that's being made. How does this land with the committee? Is it giving the committee a level of assurance that you're happy for us to continue progressing with? In terms of benefits that I alluded to earlier, and Curtis also touched on it as well, we have started to draft a benefits framework that we would like to use internally, and where and when and how that integrates with the first outline of the business change life cycle. So we have done a bit of work around that. Obviously, we're looking to recruit the benefits management role. That's just something that's running concurrently. So we will look to have a draft of that framework in place. That could be subject to change when we bring somebody into the organisation. But again, you know, perhaps having a spotlight for the committee to review what that framework looks like and how that lands and how it could be used going forward. So I'll pause there and just invite you back in, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think what I'm about to say might be quite predictable. I feel as an organisation we've been talking about benefits tracking for quite a long time, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what you said, but it feels as if we're starting from the beginning and developing something which is going to be new. Does that mean that previous efforts have been abandoned, or are we able to kind of build on previous work?
I would say, to be fair, we're starting from new. If I'm being perfectly honest, the intention is that we are looking to the RVDS programme as a bit of an exemplar of how we could use the benefits framework that we are currently in the design process to move forward. So we will look to use that as our test bed. But yeah, we're not really building on anything that was previously existing, Brian.
Why not?
Because we're not using anything at the moment, Fiona. There's no real tangible framework or tracking tool that we're using.
I'm thinking back to quite some time ago, actually, when there was some work done on benefit, predates you, Andy, on benefits and interdependencies, and there was some workshops run. I guess they're probably, so I'm thinking out loud, they're probably so long ago that starting from scratch actually probably feels right. Sorry, Curtis and then Paul.
Curtis Montgomery, Change Centre of Excellence Manager. So just part of the work we're doing is going to draw on good practice, standard practice, tried and tested methods and techniques that come from, you know, industry and other public sector organisations. So we're not creating the actual approach from scratch. We're taking the best of, I'm going to call it best of breed, and bringing it together to fit in with the approach that we'll deliver into SFRS. So I think it's just kind of a minor point, but it's just, you know, it's not completely starting from scratch.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Paul and then Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the benefits piece in terms of that challenge around why we weren't building on something that had went before, and essentially without being too crude about it, we didn't really have anything in place before. We had spoken about a number of different processes that we might adopt, and we had discussed it through some of the evaluation reports that we had previously done around identifying benefits pre-programme or pre-project, and then monitoring as we went through on a, you know, in a real cyclical way in terms of ensuring that we were monitoring the benefits. And we didn't really have that formally in place, and that's why we are starting from scratch, bringing Andy's work to the fore around the benefits management. It's always been a gap, and something that we've tried in piecemeal, if we're really honest, to fill. But now we're in that position where we're looking to put it in place to satisfy the scrutiny that would be applied by, for example, this committee.
Yeah, no, I recognise that, Paul. I know we've had a good go at it with limited resource, but never fully, and recognised we never fully got there. So no, that makes perfect sense. Brian.
Yeah, and you know, hugely kind of sympathetic about the challenges of getting this right, and welcome the approach that will now be being taken to it. However, that there have been post-implementation reviews that have identified the absence of base data, benefits tracking, etc. But there was also, it felt like a significant effort, and I think it was some sort of Excel spreadsheet-based thing that listed each project and attempted to be populated with anticipated benefits. Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing to go back to that, but my substantive question is, for the historic cases that we were using, albeit not a very good system to try and track the benefits, what are we been able to do in terms of looking back at those projects and, albeit retrospectively, trying to fill the gap that exists?
Come back on that, Chair?
Yep.
Yeah. So my overriding concern with benefits at the moment is process versus tools. Okay, so we're jumping into a tools-based conversation that we had an Excel template that was available to capture and track benefits and forecast benefits. The challenge that we had is we didn't have a robust process in place before even getting to the point of being able to forecast and track what those benefits are. So if I think about benefits management, I think about the identification of benefits, the selection of benefits, how we sequence those benefits, when those benefits are forecasted to land, and none of that was defined in terms of process. Yes, there was a tool, there was a developed Excel spreadsheet, but nobody actually understood what the process was to put that together. Now, just to be clear, it's not as an organisation that we don't talk about benefits. We talk about benefits all of the time. From a narrative perspective, benefits are captured and they're defined within all of our project documentation and dossiers, but in terms of putting a robust framework process and then a tool that supports the tracking and the forecasting of that, that's not there. And that has to be re-engineered. Now, there's elements of the tool that exist that has commonalities with the tool that we want to put in place, absolutely. And as Curtis referred to there, we'll look to take a best practice approach to how we manage benefits going forward. So it's not that we're not looking to take a best practice approach, we're looking to do that for all of the capabilities and services that we put into place. The observations and the findings around what we were doing with benefits up until this point were just deemed not to be sufficient.
And sorry, Fiona, if I might
Yeah, on you go.
I mean, I fully appreciate and understand the distinction between process and tools. It was a less than desirable position, but it was a position in terms of the tool, the spreadsheet, whatever it was, that we needed with some degree of priority to look at the projects that were at that time in train and try and piece together some sort of process that would allow reasonable estimates to be made of the benefits that were to be delivered. Now, the trail on all of that conversation for me has gone very cold over recent times. And the concern that I now have is that there's been significant activity in and around projects, significant expenditure incurred, and it feels there is no kind of clear audit trail around, what were the benefits that we set out to deliver, and do we have any means of assessing, albeit retrospectively, that these benefits were indeed achieved. So that's my concern.
And that's a legitimate concern, Brian. And I think what we could do is certainly stop everything that's in train at the moment and put all the time and effort to do that retrospective exercise. That's not an issue, because I'm pretty sure that data exists. So going back to the earlier conversation around whether or not we've got the data, we do, but it's about how do we bring it together and piece it together to give a clear picture in terms of what that benefit picture might look like across the portfolio.
Can I come in? So I think to try and sort of pull this together, we did some stuff on Excel. In my memory, and I think in Brian's, and I know Gillian, you had a lot to do with this, we did plug in some numbers. They were a bit finger in the air, but we all recognise that. We are now starting from new because we're trying to do it best practice. We have more resource, we have more understanding, etc., etc. I get all that, but I want to cycle back, and I think this might probably where Brian's coming from, is what we did at the beginning had some data included around actual numbers of benefits specific to particular projects. And I would like to, I think the committee should revisit that and say, well, where did we put a number and where does it feature in terms of the business case and the ongoing delivery and benefits realisation of particular projects? Now, that on the one hand might sound like a massive piece of work. Easy for me to say. I don't think it is that big because we didn't populate that much, but I'm sure we did do some. Does that make sense? And specifically, Brian, does that pick up where you were coming from in terms of those numbers that we'd already established?
Yeah, it does. It does, Fiona. And I'm not wishing to be kind of confrontational in any sense in this, and it's certainly not my place to make decisions about how resources might be deployed. But I think it is a reasonable question to ask that on the face of it, we had made an attempt to quantify benefits. And I would just like to understand where that effort has taken us to. You know, is it taking us to a position where we can say with some level of confidence that yes, we did, no, we didn't, you know, rather than just giving up on it, because if we give up on it, you know, that there has been a significant investment in change over a considerable period of time. And if we were to be asked, and it's a reasonable question to be asked, did these projects, did this change deliver what you set out to deliver? We need to be able to provide a response to that. So yeah, I mean, clearly it's going to be imperfect, but I would rather have something that's imperfect than nothing at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Paul and then Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And Brian, in no way is your challenge taken as adversarial or confrontational. It's really welcome in terms of that level of scrutiny. So it's not taken in that way at all, and really welcome these discussions because it really aids clarity for us as an executive and the portfolio office around what the thinking of the committee is. So more than content with that. I think the kind of historical work around the benefits has been touched on, and clearly we are moving in a direction of travel around what the future benefits model, tooling, etc. will look like. For me, there's a wee priority piece in here around the use of our resources, which is for us to look at in terms of how we direct resources, because we've had direction from the committee before around the need for us as a portfolio function to focus on the benefits realisation piece, which is where we have, you know, I have been directing Andy and Andy's been directing resources around building that in order to meet the needs and the scrutiny arrangements that the committee want to put in place. So we are pressing on with that, as Andy's articulated. I guess the only slight challenge around that is when we start to go back and look at other arrangements and whatnot, we are starting potentially to impact on the resource element of the future work. So it's just to manage that expectation around the committee, that because I agree entirely, Brian, we need something to say that project, you know, and whether that's imperfect or otherwise, we do need to record the benefits. So there's a task there for the portfolio function to best understand how we can do that in order to meet at least some of the needs of the committee in terms of scrutiny. So that was a bit of a kind of wide-ranging overview, but I was just trying to bring some of that into context and just make sure that I have got the correct understanding of what's been said here. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Ross?
Thanks, and just to echo Paul's points, I think that they're excellent points you make, Brian, and we absolutely welcome your challenge in this regard. I think, as Andy's articulated, there's a lot of work getting done in terms of future developments on benefits, but you're absolutely right to say, what about the, and I don't like the expression, but I'm going to use it, the in-flight projects at the moment. You know, how are we tracking benefits for those? To provide you with some, hopefully a level of reassurance, Brian, we've got the closing process, and the project closing process should have a look back on what the dossier said the benefits should be and whether we've achieved those benefits or not. But I'm sensing that you feel we need to have a wee bit more rigour round about that for the stuff that's ongoing at the moment, which I think is a really fair point. What I would probably ask, Chair, is rather than trying to come to a solution, could you maybe just give us as a team an action to go away, have a look at this, how we manage the gap we've got at the moment for the in-flight stuff, and how we can bring something to the committee that satisfies the committee's requirements, but probably more importantly, if we get challenged at any point in time regarding how we are managing the benefits at the moment, we've got something that can stand up to a reasonable level of scrutiny. So I would simply ask that rather than trying to jump into solution mode, you just give us an action, Chair, and we can go away and talk it off table and bring something back. Thanks.
Oh, perfect. Very well covered by all. And yes, absolutely, you therefore have that action. Thank you very much. Andy, I think that takes us to the end of your portfolio office progress report. It wasn't very quick, was it? That was not your fault, though. PVG.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thanks, Chair. And Brian, I don't take anything as being confrontational, so that's fine. PVG, the reason for bringing PVG forward in terms of the post-implementation review was to allow myself to actually spotlight some of the learnings and the lessons to actually be taken out of that particular project. So although I wasn't the SRO or the PM for the project, I'm not going to go into a great detail on the project itself. It's there and it's pretty obvious, but some of the high-level aspects of it, and from a project outcome perspective, you know, there was approximately 6,000 positions, I think, were identified as requiring to join the PVG scheme, and we achieved 99% of that. So from an outcome perspective, it was pretty successful. In terms of the approach that the project took, it was primarily seen as being a business as usual focused project, but they adopted the framework and the procedures that the portfolio function had in place to try and apply a standard and consistent approach to how they managed that project. And I think with regards to adopting that practice, they achieved the successful outcomes. Whilst the project delivered on time, you'll note from the report there were actually 3 change requests to bring forward and remediate the scheduling of the project. However, those were accepted by our routes of governance and by the organisation at that time. And from a cost perspective, the project could be deemed as being successful, coming within budget and budget reallocated within the organisation for alternative use. But some of the key insights and learnings to share with the committee and for the committee to note the value of having these post-implementation reviews for all projects moving forward, regardless of scale and complexity. It allows us as a function to, and I think we spoke about this before, but it allows us as a function to identify where we've actually got those opportunities to learn, look back and to embed the lessons for future projects. It's just about determining that when we do those post-implementation reviews, some may be more light touch than others based on their scale and their complexity and the need for a more detailed review. One of the lessons that has been identified is that over the course and duration of the project, there was actually 4 different project managers over its life cycle. This is somewhat of a common theme across the change portfolio at the moment. It's inherently risky to the project, and the implications to a project with that amount of churn can be significant in terms of successful delivery and the realisation outcomes. Therefore, as a team, we've already addressed the topic. I've addressed the topic at the People Board this week around transition planning and a bit of forward planning with regards to transition if people go through promotion or if people are retiring or leaving the organisation. How do we integrate as part of that process so that we can bring that into the in-flight projects that we have? So there's a bit of work going on there. You can see that change control was effectively applied. It goes back to some of the comments that the DEP made earlier about providing assurance from our in-place governance, which demonstrates consistency in our approach with regards to governance. The report highlights that opportunity for the portfolio office as well to consider more trend-based reporting to mitigate for prolonged periods of the project being in a potential risk state. So I think I've mentioned this before as well about, and it goes back to an earlier comment that you made, Brian, about the dashboard and how can we bring more insight from the dashboard to see what the trends are at any given point in time through the delivery of our projects. And the last one there is the opportunity to introduce a measurable approach to benefits. So we've already spoke about benefits there and how we measure and how we track those benefits, not just at the end of a project and after a project is finished, but during the course of a project, because there may well be incremental benefits that can be realised during its life cycle. So that was just some insights that I wanted to draw out from bringing the post-implementation review forward on that particular project, but we'll continue to do that for all projects that complete going forward.
No, that's great, Andy, and goes without saying, I think that we very much welcome this approach to post-implementation and the discussion of the lessons and how we go on to learn them and embed them. Does anybody have any specific questions for Andy on this one? No, good. Thank you very much. Moving on then, somewhat behind schedule, I'm afraid. And Heather, Debbie, is Liz still okay to do the risk spotlight, given that we're running somewhat behind?
Yeah, I've made her aware that we're a bit late running, so.
She knows.
Okay, so far.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go first to 10.1, the Portfolio Office Risk Log Tracker. Gillian.
Thanks, Chair. Gillian Buchanan, Portfolio Office. So you've got your covering paper, and I'm not going to go over that because I am making the assumption that you've read it. And as usual, we've highlighted the areas of change from the last meeting in yellow. So I don't really have anything else to add unless anybody has any specific questions about the content in general. But if there's any specific questions around about any particular risks, there'll be a exec lead or a project manager here, hopefully, that will be able to answer those questions for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. Questions? Nope. Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Gillian, you want back in?
Sorry, I meant to come in there. I was trying to rush things along and just forgot to mention something. We discussed at the last meeting about you see the format for the director at risk register in the new format style. We are currently working on bringing the portfolio office register into that style. We have a sample of that going to the next SMB meeting to make sure that they're content with how it's looking. So our intention is at the next change committee meeting in May, you should see the new format of the risk register. So just to make you aware of that.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. Good, thank you. Committee aligned directorate risks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And similar to Gillian, the paper has been presented. I'm making the assumption that you will all have read that. It looks at the directorate risks and the controls for the directorate risks, and it's within the new format and how they align across the directorate. Many of the risks that are on there, or some of the risks that have been on there, have been discussed already today as part of the project updates, and some will come in the private session. So happy to go into detail. The project managers are online for many of the projects anyway, but more than happy to open it up for discussion here and to take any questions. So I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Yeah, no, thanks. You're right. We have talked about quite a few. Any specific questions for Paul on the committee aligned directorate risks, Brian?
Yeah, apologies. Just looking at SDMP 3004, which is communication and engagement. We're in a position as reported where the target risk is 4 and the current assessment of the risk is 25. And my question is really around the estimated timescale to get that back on track. And I know it's linked again to resources, but I wonder, Paul, if you could offer some sort of comment.
Yeah, certainly, Brian. And during David's update, he spoke about that public consultation team. So we now have our staff identified and successful through the process. And the final one, now, David, correct me just if I'm wrong here, David, is due to commence towards the end of March. Therefore, we will have all staff in place. So there's a wee timing issue just around the reporting here, but we now have identified the staff that have been successful through the process, and all will be in place by March.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to 10.3 risk spotlight. Huge apologies to Liz and Scott. Very tardy and poor chairing by moi. But over to you guys. Oh, sorry, Stuart. Sorry to interrupt, Stuart. I didn't see your hand go up.
Yeah, sorry. We had a brief chat about this report before, and I don't know whether I'm just misunderstanding it, but I'm not entirely clear what this committee is meant to do in relation to these directorate risks.
Well, I guess
I don't know if that's a question or an observation, or whether I just need somebody to fill me in offline. I'm not sure.
So in my book, it's about awareness and being able to ask questions. As much, and it provides a slightly different lens from some of the risks we look at, so we can see very clearly that they're change committee and they're aligned to a specific directorate. So that's what I take from it. Ross, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that this committee is in a different position when it comes to risk, because normally the committee would see a single risk register, which is effectively a cut of the strategic and the directorate risk registers that are of relevance to that particular committee. But this committee gets 2 different risk registers, because you get that and you get the stuff that Gillian's already spoken to, which is the specific risks associated with the projects and programmes within the portfolio. So I think that's why there's the 2 different risk registers that come forward to this committee, which probably doesn't assist with any confusion in relation to it. And I think with taking into account the committee's role, whether it's the first risk register or the second one, I think it's very much what Fiona's articulated, which is one of scrutiny. So is there anything that causes any particular concern that you would like to apply any particular scrutiny to the executive roundabout? So I think that's essentially it, Stuart, which is essentially please scrutinise anything that you think is causing any particular concerns within either of those risk registers. Thanks.
So does that mean that them being presented to this committee is not, it has been done for information and challenge at this committee, but it's not being done as part of the formal risk management?
So Brian will probably come in and answer this better than I will, but essentially so we've got strategic risks, and the strategic risks are on the first appendix that's attached to this report. Underpinning those are individual directorate risks, which support those strategic risks, or not support them, but underpin those strategic risks. Each of those directorate risks are managed on a day-to-day basis by the responsible director, and SLT scrutinise that along with the strategic risk register. Just as part of the normal risk management process, as well as there being a responsible director or head of function for those individual risks, that for each individual directorate risk, there is also a committee of the board that is allocated to scrutinise that risk. So it's very much part of the risk management process, but it recognises the scrutiny role that the committees play as opposed to any role that the executive play, if that makes sense. So every committee gets a very similar risk picture for the directorate risks that are aligned to that particular committee. Thanks.
So it is part of the formal risk management process.
I could have just said yes, Stuart, and that would be all.
No, it's helpful. No, I'm just trying to get it in my own head what we're, because I being part of the formal process, I think it's really quite challenging for the committee to do that properly. And maybe that's the bit we need to reflect on.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. Brian?
Yeah, I think you've just hit the nail on the head, Stuart. It is very challenging because, I mean, as non-executives, part of what we do is to come to a view on the effectiveness of the risk management arrangements operating across the organisation. And in many organisations, that task falls solely to the audit committee to do that. But that's not a sensible approach, particularly in large organisations. So you kind of spread that task over committees. And what we are attempting to do, and I think we still need to work out exactly how we do it. And we had a conversation at the last audit committee about how do we answer your question? You know, how do we actually use this articulation of risks to satisfy our responsibility for scrutiny and challenge? So it's about using this and, in a sense, sort of taking examples to inquire of the executive, you know, what is it you're doing in respect of this particular risk? You know, it's showing 25 when we believe it should be 4. So why is there a gap? What's being done to fill that gap? And in a sense, what we're doing is we're dipstick testing the effectiveness of the risk management arrangements. And hopefully, as we have today, we've had assurance that the executive understand what the issues are and are on the case. But I think one of the challenges is we're almost kind of overwhelmed with the amount of information that we get, and you know, there's a conversation to say whether that's appropriate or not. Personally, I believe it is better to see that bigger picture and then sort of select. And that is, in my experience and opinion, you know, just part of normal process. It is a bit more challenging for us, but I think it's a valuable thing that we need to do.
Yeah, I agree, Brian, and just to that particular point, it does seem overwhelming, and this is quite a regular conversation, and I think we're getting better, but there is a lot of information, and it can seem quite daunting trying to pick out the salient points. And just to add to that, the risk spotlight is another means of saying, well, here's one that we, you know, sucking of teeth. We just want to know a bit more about it, which obviously we're about to come on to. But Ross.
Sorry, I'm conscious time. I'll keep this really brief. You've already covered the point about risk spotlighting, which is a tool that is used in discussion with the chair of committees to identify what is a good risk to do a bit more of a deep dive into. Another thing that I would state, and it's been a frustration of mine for a while, and it's possibly what's part of the challenge that's been discussed at the moment, is we tend to use the same information and format for both management information for managing risk and also reporting into committee. So we probably need to make a distinction between what's it important for the executive to have to manage risk on a day-to-day basis, and that's not necessarily the same as what gets reported into committees. So there's probably just a wee bit of work to do to try and streamline those individual processes, but it's very much a work in progress. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, Stuart. Please say yes.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. Sorry, after that lovely build-up for Liz and Scott, it's now your slot on the agenda. Go for it.
I saw Angelina had her hand up there, but she's taken it down, so I'm assuming that's okay. Yeah, hello everyone. Myself and Scott are hopefully going to give you a summary of where we're at with risk pod 010. So we are, this is a risk that we're proposing to reduce in rating. There's actually a meeting tomorrow with the team and with David Johnson just to take a look at that. It's currently sitting at 4.416 and we're proposing to reduce it to 3.412. So I'll give you the reasons for that during this update. We secured additional resources for pod, both for short and medium term through the business case process. And what this is allowing us to do is to continue with our business as usual without any of that slipping. Deal with COVID recovery, which is not insignificant, and I know we are all in that situation, and also provide support for these other critical priorities, most of which you'll be discussing in this committee, I'm sure. We've also continued as a directorate to keep a very tight rein on the annual operating plan and directorate plans. This is something that in the past I think we've been a bit over-ambitious with. So we've tended to have huge numbers of things on there, and that becomes quite overwhelming, and it means that you're probably not going deep enough with some of the things that you need to deliver and maybe not delivering as efficiently. So the COVID situation has forced us to streamline that, and that's something that I am really keen to stick to, and I'm encouraging the team to do that. I think it's for the greater good of the service because they get better quality in what we're delivering, and also it means that I'm not constantly overstretching my staff, which I think has been something that has been a real problem for the directorate over the last certainly couple of years. So that's something that we're very mindful of. Obviously the PTFAS programme is a significant project for the service generally, but for the pod directorate in particular, and that's something that we need to understand is probably the key priority for the next couple of years, because it's going to have such an impact across the service and it is so critical. So that will definitely be number one priority, I would expect, for at least the next couple of years. The other thing that's important to say here is that the thing that works really well for us in supporting the other change programmes is to get early engagement. So it doesn't work as effectively if the plans are fairly crystallised by the time we are asked what the people impact of that is. So the earlier we get involved in that, the better, because it means that we can spot any concerns or considerations that need to be taken into account at that conceptual stage. So that's a kind of ask that we are continually pushing across the service, and it doesn't always happen. Sometimes we get involved a bit too late. However, it's not to say that we don't get consulted, we do, but it's much more effective if we get in at the very early planning stages. So that's something we continually ask our stakeholder groups to be mindful of. So whilst I've said this risk is reduced, we of the vacancies that we had, so we had 33 from the business case and we've filled 29 of them. So we now only have 4 that are in train, which is excellent progress, I have to say. And Pod as a directorate overall have currently 10 vacancies, including those 4. So we are actually in a pretty good position, and we've managed to make quite a few of those external appointments, which means there's no chain to consider. And we're also bringing in some new talent and new skills and experience. I think the other thing to say is that the reason this is still a risk is, as you'll be aware, presumably, that the current external recruitment market is very different than what it's been for some considerable time. I think you know, Brexit and COVID have really made a massive difference, and we are very mindful that that is creating risk of higher turnover than normal and difficulty in recruiting. We're already seeing some early signs of that, and we're taking some early action to mitigate that. So, for example, we had a market allowance panel the other day to look at driving instructors, because that's a crisis across the UK, as you'll been hearing in the press. So that's something that we took early intervention for to change the salary, because we're losing drivers and we're not able to attract drivers. So the market allowance process is quite helpful for that, because I expect this will be a temporary, albeit probably fairly long temporary issue, until we get to some kind of normality. So we need to keep a very close eye on that, and we're not going to take our foot off the pedal in relation to that, because that impacts the Pod directorate in relation to this risk, but it also impacts the wider service and our ability to recruit on their behalf. So I was going to just leave it there. That's kind of me tried to just give you a brief summary of the paper. So if there are any questions, Chair, I'm happy to, between myself and Scott, hopefully we can deal with them.
No, that was great. Really good. Thank you. Any questions for Liz and Scott? There you go. So thorough. Nobody's got any questions. Well done.
All right. Well, Scott and I will leave you to the rest of your meeting then. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks all for that. Angelina, sorry, you did have your hand up earlier. Did you're right, you're shaking your head. Okay. Okay. Committee rolling forward planning and items for consideration at future IGF, etc. Has anybody got anything to add to the forward plan or to flag for IGF? No. Stuart.
Fiona, I don't know if it's IGF, but it seems that it certainly is a wider issue than the change committee I was going to ask about. Was we had a discussion very recently about the severity of the budget challenges that are coming along, and I'm not clear in my mind how we know what the impact of that is on this committee, on the work of this committee, bearing in mind that this committee it's not approving things, but it's certainly giving tacit approval to things and managing things against now a backdrop that we don't necessarily, it's very unclear in terms of budget, in terms of resources available. And I have something in my head that I think there's an issue, but I'm not clear how we try to answer that.
Are you referring to the budget envelope we get from Scottish Government, or are you referring to what the service does with that in terms of prioritisation and change programme list, or a bit of both?
I think I'm probably talking about both, but I think the clear message was that it's going to be very tight.
Yes.
And if it's so tight, has there to be some hard choices to be made? How do we influence or state the impact of those hard choices? What are those hard choices? I'm just not clear how we accept answers, and we're not going to answer it now, clearly, but I'm not clear how we start to answer some of these. Hence why I wasn't sure whether it was
absolutely fair point. I'll invite Brian and Ross. I assume it's on this specific point, is it? Yeah, nodding. And Nick, I'll come to you after that, if that's okay. And Brian.
Sorry, I was just going to say it might be better for Ross to come in first, if you don't mind, Fiona.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks. It was probably just to give an update on where we are in terms of the budget setting for this year coming up, 22-23, and beyond that. So in terms of 22-23, I am leading a subgroup at the moment of SLT, which is looking at the detail of the budget for 22-23. Now, the full board's already seen the budget strategy, and this will build on the budget strategy to put a bit more meat on the bones. There's a board strategy day, I think it's on the 24th of February.
23rd, but yeah,
but
thereabouts.
Give the board an opportunity to input informally at that stage, and then we'll bring the budget forward to SLT and the board throughout March. So there'll be that informal opportunity for the full board, and then formalising that in March. Clearly, there will be, within the budget, there are opportunities for savings and additional cost pressures and stuff like that. Some will be linked to change, and there's clearly costs associated with change and potential savings. So we will try and articulate where those opportunities exist, but quite a lot of the change that we've spoken about today, as you know, has a cost element associated with it, and quite clearly our ambitions will need to be matched with what available budget we've got for change. But the full board will be given an opportunity to input to that process across this month and next. In terms of the resource spending review that's ongoing with Scottish Government, they look to publish their findings around about May time in terms of the next 3 years. And again, we are inputting using our medium-term financial modelling. We are inputting into that process via our sponsor team as well, albeit, as I'm sure you can appreciate, with a May deadline for the government to turn that around, we're operating against some pretty tight timescales in terms of putting our cases across to government. So that's where we're at the moment with the immediate budget for next year, and then the next 3 year process thereafter, if that hopefully just gives a wee bit of an understanding of where we currently are. Thanks.
Does that help, Stuart?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there'll obviously be a flow through to Change Committee as we better understand the size of the pot and that whole prioritisation conversation inevitably, I guess. And Brian.
Yeah, it was really just to kind of, Ross has kind of done this already, but link Stuart's question back to the discussion that we had recently on the financial strategy, because one of the issues that was raised around that was being able to articulate the budget across the key activities of the organisation, which I think, Stuart, takes us closer to understanding, you know, the relative priorities of the organisation. And of course, one way that you could cut that is to say, well, how much of that is attributable, easy for me to say, to the change programme, and by definition through to the work of this committee. So I've got a discussion next week with John Thompson as part of that process, a minor part of that process. But I think Ross has said that there'll be opportunities for the board to have further discussions on this, because it's a perfectly reasonable and valid point.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Nick.
Very quick point. For the IGF, I'd welcome a discussion in relation to the portfolio office risk register, and then linking that in, the value of linking that into directorate aligned risks, because I'm not sure there is necessarily a very clear advantage of bringing the directorate aligned risks to this, because I think it'd be very difficult to ring fence that in such a way that it would keep focused conversation within the change committee. And I'm not sure of what of where that conversation would lead, but I just feel that right at the moment, I can't quite see the pure benefit of bringing directorate line risks to this. And I think we are in danger then of opening up discussions within, say, the service delivery or the service delivery directorate risks that aren't then pertinent to this committee. So really what I'm saying is, could we bring that into the IGF, please? Because I think it's probably worth a conversation.
Okay, Andy.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to come in and respond to Nick's point very, very quickly. Similar concerns, Nick. I've raised it with David Johnson internally around how we do some of the risk reporting across the portfolio, because I don't necessarily see the linkage at the moment. That's not in the fullness of time in the future that we can't link it. It just doesn't seem relevant at the moment, and I think it causes more confusion than it actually gives clarity in terms of what we're doing from a risk perspective for this committee and for the change portfolio. So I'll continue to have those conversations internally with David as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we have an IGF action there. I need to think about it a bit more in terms of actually articulating what it is. And maybe, Nick, I can pick up with you separately, but that's fine.
Please do.
Yeah, captured. Anything else for IGF? No. Okay. That leaves us then to do review of actions, which I'm sure Heather is looking forward to. What have you got?
I've noted 4 actions, Chair. These are under item 8.1, Portfolio Office Project Dashboard. A financial scale to be provided against each project, just to give an idea of the size of the project. Under 8.2, the PTFAS system programme update. Clarification to be provided around the governance route for the business case and when the change committee will see that.
Yep.
Under item 9.1, the Portfolio Office progress update, there's 2 actions. One is for the timelines for the internal audit report, for the Portfolio Office evaluation to be looked at and ensure it comes to the change committee as well as ARAC. And second action is for the Portfolio Office to look at how to manage the gap around benefits realisation for projects currently in progress.
Yeah, I think there was another one which we maybe didn't explicitly catch as an action, but Andy was going to talk to me about a date for us to look at the project lifecycle work. Andy, do you recognise that? Yep. Okay.
We'll capture that as well then, Chair.
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you. Sorry, keep going.
That was it. That was the 4 I'd noted.
Okay. I'm just and the one for IGF, obviously, that we've just covered. Has anybody got any other actions they've captured that Heather hasn't already summarised? Good, I haven't. Well done, Heather. Thank you very much for that. And date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 12th of May, where hopefully it'll be lots warmer. And that takes us to the end of the public session.